Today's episode of Free Mama Radio is all about turning our mess into our message. I'm going to tell you about one of the lowest points in my entire life and how I was able to turn it into one of the best things that's ever happened to me. So if you are in a place in your life where things are not going well, I want to encourage you, mama, that this could actually be the fuel and fire you need to turn things around once and for all.
You're listening to Free Mama Radio, where we believe you can have both a successful business and show up as the mom you want to be. I'm your host, Lauren Golden, a mom who built a full-time income working part-time hours. Now, I help other moms like you learn how to work from home on your own terms, take control of your schedule, and make more money so you can live a totally awesome, guilt-free life. I am on a mission to make sure that no mother has to choose between family and financial stability. So if you've been wondering, can I really have it all? This podcast will give you the answers.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen and be a part of this brand new podcast. I am just absolutely overwhelmed by the response the Free Mama community has given to this new project of mine. And I want you to know how grateful I am for you. Now, today's episode is going to be a little bit on the personal side. We're going to lift up the rug, so to speak, and go a little bit deep and honestly a little bit dark in terms of some things that I've been through. And if you are a member of the Free Mama community, this might be a story that you've heard parts of before. But really, this is where it all began for me. You know, I didn't grow up thinking I'm going to own a business someday. I definitely didn't think from a childhood, like I'm going to have this online course and whatever. Like that wasn't something I aspired to. I didn't even know this stuff was a thing when I was little, right? Like, don't we all just want to be like teachers or doctors or artists when we're little? But alas, here we are. And I definitely feel like I am living my best life, living my purpose and getting to share my mission and vision with all of you. And so, but how did we get here, right? Like, how did we get to a place where I'm doing something I didn't even know existed? And if you're listening to this right now, there's a really good chance that you might be in a similar position. Maybe you've had an entire career, or maybe you got higher education in a particular thing or with the goal to become a certain thing. And if your story is like mine, maybe motherhood was the catalyst for what kind of threw you off. So today we're going to dive into my miscarriage story, but this isn't just a story of loss. It is that. But for me, you know, however many years later, it's actually a story about how I turned one of the lowest points in my life into the best thing that's ever happened to me. And so before I dive into all the details, I want to offer that up to you, wherever you are in your life right now, especially those of you who are going through hardships, you're going through something really challenging. You know, right now, while I'm recording this, we're still in isolation. We're still social distancing. Millions of people have lost their job and are finding themselves in unemployment and not knowing what's going to come next. And every time someone shows up in the Free Mama Facebook group and posts something about that exact thing, you know, I lost my job, I got laid off, I've been furloughed, I don't know if I have a position to go back to, all of these things, every single time I post the same thing that happened to me when I was in the lowest point. And that is, I hope one year you look back on this time in your life, this super hard, challenging, overwhelming time, and you say, wow, that is the best thing that ever happened to me, because it kicked me into gear. It gave me a reality check and it lit a fire of clarity so that I could start living my life the way that I wanted to and not the way that I thought I should. So that's what we're going to dive into. But this for me, it goes way back to my childhood, friends. This is not something that just started when I became a mom. This is something I think, you know, the seeds were planted long ago. And that's because I grew up with a stay-at-home mom, and she was and is absolutely amazing. She's incredibly involved. She was involved in the community. She was involved in our school. She picked us up and dropped us off every single day. You know, she was able to do the afternoon snacks. I never rode the bus in my life. She was always there and incredibly present. And as a child, I'm sure there were times where that was extremely annoying, because I actually do remember a friend in like first grade who got to ride the bus, and I was very jealous because we always want what we can't have, right? But as I grew up, that became my model. That became, you know, kind of this pillar of success of what being a good mom looked like. And I also grew up with an entrepreneurial dad. He still owns his own business. He's always been self-employed. And so I saw him working a lot. He worked very, very hard. Sometimes he worked long hours, but something that always stood out to me was that he never missed important events. He never missed a soccer game. He never missed a dance recital. In fact, I danced at a studio where we had a father-daughter dance every year. And so not only did he not miss a dance recital, but he actually was on stage with me year after year. And I always knew, I was always very aware of how special that was, that not all of my other friends, moms and dads, were able to show up the way that mine were. And I knew I was lucky, but I don't think I realized how challenging that might have been for them to create a life where that was possible, and all of the risks and sacrifices that go into that, until I became a parent. And so when Justin and I, my husband, found out that we were expecting after about a year of trying to get pregnant, it was really interesting because I had this vision of what a family looked like and what role everybody in that family played, because that was the example that was in front of me. But something really interesting happened, and that's that Justin and I not once had a conversation about what it would look like for me to stay home. And we never talked about it, but I think it's because we both knew the reality of our financial situation. We already owned our first home. We had a mortgage. We had bills. I knew what he earned. He knew what I earned. And it was going to require both of us contributing financially to continue to live the life that we were living. And of course, that added childcare on top of it. But the math, it wasn't going to add up for anything to look differently. And, I wrestled with a lot of emotions as a result. I think, if I'm being really honest, part of me was resentful that I had these unrealistic expectations placed upon my spouse that I had never even spoken of. And then I felt guilty that I felt resentful. And then, of course, I was consumed with guilt about the idea that I wasn't going to be able to stay home with my child. It was devastating. But life goes on, as it does. Every new day kept coming, and I took a 12-week maternity leave. It was unpaid. I had to do the typical go through all your vacation days. I did get short-term disability for a few weeks as well. But I was able and fortunate that I was able to take the full 12 weeks off before returning to work. And we were really, really lucky because when we first started our search for childcare, we kept getting waitlisted places. Everything was full, which was completely crazy to me that daycares and preschool type settings could have year-long waiting lists, because in my pregnant mind, those children were not even conceived yet. But alas, we got put on all of these wait lists and kept looking and kept talking. And thank goodness for social media, which has just been such a powerful tool through all of my adult life. But we posted something on my personal page looking for recommendations and just putting some feelers out there. And we were very lucky because one of my best friends from high school's best friend from college, back in college when you were Facebook friends with everyone you ever met, she happened to see it. And she is someone who had studied childhood education and went on to get married. She was an au pair when she was first married, but then she already had 2 children. And at that time, she started an in-home childcare. And she saw my Facebook post. I still remember my husband and I being so nervous and going to meet with her at a Panera and having dinner together and talking about what this would look like for this woman, this friend of a friend, to watch our unborn child when she was born every single day. And what a weird experience that was in those early days of starting to become a parent and figuring these things out. And so again, I knew I was lucky at the time. I was super grateful that she was going to be in someone's home, that she was going to be, in a small group setting with just a couple of other children. But it was still devastating to go back to work. So after those 12 weeks, I couldn't drop her off. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I had Justin take her, and that became a part of our new routine. And he took her that first day, and I headed to the office a complete wreck. Although if I'm being completely transparent, I think a part of me was excited about having some adult conversation and maybe even putting on real clothes for the first time in 3 months. And something absolutely amazing happened that first day back at work. I've told this story a lot of times. I remember exactly where I was when it happened. Do you remember those types of things in your life? Those events where you're like, I know exactly where I was when this conversation happened or when I found out this news. This was one of those moments for me where I remember the office I was in. I remember the chair. I know what everything looked like. And I remember having a physical reaction. It was sometime after lunch. I had probably already pumped 2 times that day, which I had to do in a bathroom. And I sat back down at my desk, started working on whatever I was working on, and I actually physically pushed myself back in my chair, hands on the table, and leaned back and had this moment of like, oh my gosh, I love working. I love working. And it was this aha moment. And literally in that moment, in that first day back from maternity leave, I forgave myself for not being my mom, for not being a stay-at-home mom. And if that's who you are, if that's what you want, that is so beautiful. But for me, I was so consumed in guilt for not having become that person. Not that I had a choice financially, but in that moment, I gave myself permission to not have to become that person if I didn't want to. And that was really, really significant for me. And that was actually the first of 3 aha moments. And the next one came a couple of years later. You know, we just, again, as we do, life goes on, the sun sets, the sun comes up again the next day. And flash forward a couple of years, all of a sudden I met with our second child, my son. And I had horrible pregnancies with all my pregnancies. So it was definitely hard, you know, having a 1.5-year-old and throwing up multiple times a day while you're pregnant and then having to go to work on top of it. It was a lot. And I don't remember this as the best time in my life by any means. I remember it being very stressful and feeling overwhelming, but I don't remember it really hitting that tipping point, that point when I couldn't take it anymore until my son was born. And that's when my second aha came to me. And that was when I realized that I love working and that doesn't have to change. That can be a part of my identity and that can be something that I continue to do. But what I did realize was now that I had 2 children who needed me, as well as a spouse who, if I'm just really honest, during these years was pretty much neglected. He came last and he knew it and I knew it. And I didn't have the energy to do anything about it or to fix it. And I had a boss who was counting on me to be there all the time. And so my second aha moment was that I can love working, but the 9 to 5, this traditional job where someone else, an employer, tells me what to do and when to do it and how much I'm going to do it for, that wasn't working for me anymore. I think my tolerance for working for someone else was eliminated in that moment. And from that point moving forward, going to my job became harder and harder and harder. And that's when I started seeking other opportunities. And I always joke, and it's actually in our trailer of this podcast, if you have Googled how to make money from home, I have tried it already. So spare yourself from going through all of the different opportunities. I've done them all. I've done the research, I've put in the work, and that's part of why the Free Mama exists, is hopefully you can learn from my pain and time and energy and mistakes and failures and fast track your own personal success. So now I've got these 2 epiphanies, right? I love working, but I love being a mom, but the 9 to 5 is not working for me, right? Like I've got to find this other way to do it. And I tried a lot of different things. The most serious that I probably pursued that actually brought any sort of return to me, believe it or not, was network marketing. And if you've heard this story from me before, or heard me talk about network marketing, you know that when I first got involved, I was just desperate. I was still on maternity leave. I was looking for anything that could maybe, like hoping, wishing, praying that I wouldn't have to return to my job. And I was very vulnerable. When I found this world, I was invited to this party and told about this quote unquote opportunity and saw the pictures of the dream car and the free vacations and all of these things. And immediately I'm like, yes, this is it. This is my ticket out. I mean, they just flashed everything I wanted in front of me and talked to all of my pain points. And I thought, this is it. Here we go. And so here's the truth. Here's what happened at the end. I spent 6 months hosting parties on nights and weekends when I'm already working a full-time 9 to 5 job. I'm already feeling like I'm not showing up as the parent I want to be. And now I'm being pulled out of my house on top of it in this pursuit of freedom and being able to have the life that I want. But during this time, I'm actually doing the opposite of what I'm saying that I want. But of course, I was blissfully unaware that that's what was happening with my time. And I was actually doing pretty good. I had a lot of people buying product from me, but I had my upline, the people, who had recruited me, telling me that I needed to buy a certain amount of inventory so I can have it available because it's so much easier. So I'm investing my time to do these parties. I'm investing money to have all this stuff to sell at the parties. And, you got to have a website and you got to have merchant card services so that you can use a credit card so that people can pay easier because who has checks anymore? And I'm just like this puppy, like with these wide eyes, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to own a business and get a free car. And like, I just have to do what they say. And so I'm doing all this stuff and I'm making money, but I'm also spending a lot of money. And, I part of me does believe you need to spend money to make money, but I'm not really doing the math because I don't have a background in business or accounting. And so I'm kind of just going through the motions. And it wasn't until, honestly, I'm sad to say, about 6 months later that I sat down and really did the math and realized that while I had grossed thousands of dollars, I had only netted or earned myself personally about $200 in 6 months. And later, as I got more interested in this idea of network marketing and MLMs and direct sales and how many women are joining them every single day, and of course men are too, but I'm worried about the moms here. And I'm doing some research and I realized, statistically speaking, across these business models, these companies that follow this business model of recruiting other people to sell the products or services and growing a team and following this MLM model, 99.71% of people will fail. They will lose money. And I got pissed. I mean, furious, if I'm honest, that I was actually considered one of the lucky ones. Yet when I looked at how my time and resources were being spent, I was completely out of alignment with my values and the thing that I was pursuing. And so I looked at this information, I looked at the research, I looked at my bank account and my Excel sheet because I didn't even have real accounting software. I just put everything into a spreadsheet. And I'm realizing the only way to make real money in network marketing is to recruit, right? And to have all these people under you. But the problem was the way I had gotten recruited was by selling the dream, right? The end goal that only a small fraction of a percent will ever achieve. And so I felt very out of alignment. I felt like it was completely disingenuous to go down this business model of recruiting people and getting them to buy into this concept so that I could financially benefit off of them, knowing that statistically the majority of us were destined to fail. And that was the end of network marketing for me. And around this time, thank goodness, because I was pretty darn defeated and had determined that this was just the life I would be living, resenting my husband for not making enough money for me to be able to play stay-at-home mom all the time, even though we were honest that that wasn't even the kind of life we really wanted. That's what was going on in my mind every single day. And during this time, late at night one night, when my husband wasn't home because he was off following his dreams and building his business that we had taken out a big SBA loan for, I came across a Facebook ad for a webinar, and it was all about starting a social media management agency. Now, I knew a little bit about social media management because at the time I was working for a school, and previously I had worked for a couple of magazines, and I always managed their social media pages, just putting some stuff out there for the people watching. Not a whole lot of strategy involved, but my feet were wet. I had had some exposure. And so I watched this webinar, and this webinar changed my entire life. But it was also one of the scariest things I had ever watched, because at the end, the woman on the webinar offered a program, a course. And this was the first time I had ever seen anything like this. And it was $1,000. And I did not have an extra $1,000. In fact, at that time, $1,000 sounded like some sort of wild fantasy. And I remember getting this pit in my stomach of like, oh my gosh, I can't do that. But I also knew in my head and my heart that I couldn't not do it. And so I went and got my credit card while my husband was at home and my two babies, who I was desperate to be around, were in their beds. And I bought this course. Now, I had no intention of becoming a social media manager with an agency and all this stuff. I just wanted to make enough money every month that I could leave my decent to low-paying job at a school. And I devoured this course. I just devoured it. And I realized that what I could take from what I had learned in this course was the fundamentals of setting up and running a freelancing business, because essentially an agency without people to outsource to is freelancing. And if you're new to this idea of freelancing, really it's just providing a service and you're not an employee. You might get an LLC, which is just a legal structure. You might be a sole proprietor, again, legal structure. But basically, you're a W-9. You're going to pay a 1099. You're not a W-2. You're not an employee. You're doing contract work for someone. And I started to piece together the parts of the course that could benefit me for my specific goals and where I was heading. And in the first 2 months, I was able to pay off the course in full. My very first client was actually my boss's husband. And one of the biggest things that people are held back on that I hear from my students now is that they're so afraid to tell people. And I'm always like, you have to tell people. It wasn't easy for me. It was terrifying, but I also knew it was the one and only thing I could do if I really was serious and wanted to get clients. You can't not tell people and build a successful business. And so I went to my HR. I made sure that I was not breaking any rules, having this little side freelancing business. And when I got the green light, I made sure that people knew that I was doing this on the side. Everybody knew that I had had this second baby. And I had bills to pay and they knew what I got paid. So I didn't get a lot of questions or feedback, just like I hadn't when I started network marketing and started talking about it. And so I got a couple of clients and I started to make a plan. Now, I don't know if there's any planners listening, if you're a planner like me, but I'm very type A and I like to be in control and I love a good plan. I'm also the kind of person who likes to play it safe. Not a big risk taker, don't like gambling. Kind of like safety and security. So let me know if that resonates with you, but that's where I was at. And so I started making this 1-year plan. Now, I like to say that the 1-year plan is the safest of all the plans, right? Because it's close enough that you feel like your dreams and goals might actually happen during this year, but it's far enough that you're not going to like pee your pants because you're so stinking nervous about having to follow through with this thing. You got a whole year, right? So I made this super safe, but not totally realistic 1-year plan of building up my freelancing business on the side so that I could leave my job, which was the thing I wanted, but was also probably the thing that was scariest to me because, like I said, my husband was pursuing his dream of owning this car detailing business. We had bought out 3 physical locations. He wasn't paying himself at the time, and the whole family was on my benefits, and that included our health insurance. And so while I wanted this thing, it still made me nauseous in my stomach to think about actually having. So I created a 1-year plan. And about 2 months into this 1-year plan, we found out I was pregnant again. And that, I can tell you, with all the confidence in the world, was not a part of my 1-year plan. So what happened? I made a new plan. I said, cool, now, because I'm a total chicken, I don't even have to quit my job. I just won't come back from maternity leave. I'll send an email. This will be very easy. That was my first thought after I found out I was pregnant. And so I started planning with this new plan. I'm like, cool, that's cool. Now I've got 9 months instead of 12 months, but we're all good. We're going to keep building the freelancing business. And then I just won't go back to work. And that became my new plan. And again, as life goes on, the days just kept going until time stopped. And I already told you what happens because I didn't want to catch anybody off guard. I know that this is a very common thing that happens to women, although we don't all share it openly. We all have different ways of healing and grieving. And at my 12-week appointment, and my husband was with me, which was very rare for these prenatal appointments, we found out that we had lost the baby and time stopped. And in that moment, I remember feeling more sorry for the doctor who had to tell me the news than myself. I remember looking at my husband's face go super pale, and I knew that it wasn't even for him. I knew that it was for me. I remember going to the main part of the hospital to get a second ultrasound to verify what we already knew. And it was around that time that it really sunk in that I had had a miscarriage. And I won't go into all of the details, but what I will say is something about this grief caused a voice. Sounds a little crazy, but it's true. It caused a voice to pop into my head. And it kept saying over and over and over again, what's your plan now? What's your new plan? What are you really waiting for? And 1 week after that day that I found out I had miscarried, I went in for a D&C procedure the next morning. 1 week after the day we found out that I had lost the baby, I walked in and I quit my job. Not 9 months later, not 12 months later, 1 week later, with maybe a third of my salary replaced from freelancing clients. And I decided that enough was enough. And if I wouldn't do it now, when would I? And I know that it might sound crazy, but that miscarriage gave me the push I needed to start living my life the way I actually wanted to be living it. I was out of plans and I was out of excuses. And while my long timeline had felt safe, I realized there was no perfect time or perfect circumstance to make a change that was honestly terrifying deep down. Now, in case you're like me, I should tell you that at the time of my miscarriage, I literally wanted to punch people in the face when their words of condolences to me were that everything happens for a reason. I thought it was incredibly insensitive to tell me that my unborn child had died for a reason. But in hindsight, I now know that that baby gave me a huge gift in life, and it was the gift of perspective. And so while I like to think that I would have followed through with my plan to leave my job and build a business from home or find some way to work on my own terms, I'm honestly not positive that I would have. I'm not positive that I wouldn't have found a new plan or a new excuse or something to stall. So what happened next? Well, I was asked to stay on through December. This was in September. And I was asked to stay on until December, which gave me a little more time to plan, but with a lot more flexibility to be home part-time, which I had never worked from home before, but I got a lot of flexibility because I was doing them a favor. I also, in the same conversation that I quit my job, gave them a proposal to do freelance work for some of my responsibilities from my employment position on a contract basis, and therefore secured another client. And in that first year after I left, I not only replaced my income working from home, but I did it on my own terms, working half the hours that I was physically gone when I was working for someone else. We were able to figure out insurance early on in those years. We went through the exchange, the healthcare exchange. And since then, we have gone through numerous things. At times, my husband has been back with an employer. We've gone through them. And right now, we actually go through an independent broker. So my point to you there is that where there's a will, there's a way. There's always a way to figure it out. And my husband and I have both had seasons of being self-employed ever since. At one point, I was able to actually retire my husband while working from home, providing a service online. And so what I want you to know from this, and what I hope that you get from this, is that it does not take a tragedy for you to find your way. I want you to know that I'm here to help you in any way that I can, that this podcast, I hope, will give you just oodles of inspiration and motivation and action-taking tips and hearing from other women who have their own version of either this story or whatever it is that they've been through. And so I just hope you'll join me in that. And I hope that you will decide, because only you can, that you want to do the work and you want to get uncomfortable and you want to take those eye-opening risks of not waiting, of living how you want to live now, because safe is a little bit of an illusion, is something I think I've learned over the last few weeks of the coronavirus impacting our lives. So my biggest message to you, not only today, but through this podcast, is one of choice. I want you to know that you have the ability to decide and choose how you live your life, how you make your money, how you treat your husband, how you feel about your husband pursuing his dreams while you are not pursuing yours. These are all things I'm able to look back on now and go, wow, I really could have done that differently if I would have had the confidence to choose to. So thank you so much for listening today. And until next time, I hope you find the courage and the support to start living your totally awesome, guilt-free life.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Free Mama Radio. Don't forget to check out Free Mama TV right here on YouTube for hundreds of how-to videos and interviews to help you start, grow, and scale a virtual business from home. If you want to join a community of tens of thousands of moms just like you, make sure you join the Free Mama Movement group over on Facebook. And lastly, if you want to learn more about how we can do this together, work to achieve your goals, and make you our next success story, check out my free training at thefreemamamovement.com. I'll see you next time.